Yeah, have we started yet? Have we started? Oh, go on then.
Hello, welcome to the Very Liberal podcast with me, Lembit,
And me, Mark Oaten.
where we look at things from a liberal perspective, a little bit of discussion and a lot of argument. In this show today, what will we cover?
The election. It's finally over. We can check whether our predictions were right or wrong. And we should also reflect on some of the big names that have lost out. You know, some of the big beasts that actually fell on election night.
And maybe some we won't miss so much either, Mark.
I can think many of them we won't miss.
Yeah.
And also, what's it like when you get elected first time round? We've got, I think it's something like 250 new MPs coming into Parliament. So let's share some experiences of what they need to do and what they don't need to do.
And maybe a bit about what it does feel like to lose. You got two well-qualified politicians on that one. So let's begin with the general election. Unless you've been asleep for the last few months, you may have noticed that we have a new government. Hooray! I'm being ironic.
Oh, right. Okay.
But we do have a new government, a stonking majority for Keir Starmer.
He did well in the end. Look, we talked in our podcast about the fact he had one job to do, which was to carry this vase all the way across from the start of the election for 6 weeks without dropping it. And he didn't drop it. And in fact, quite the opposite.
But what a campaign. Look at what we're proposing. It's change. No. Yeah, it's got to be changed from blue to red. And that's about
but
it.
it's Lembit. But actually,
That's about it. That's only changed the colour.
But it's worked.
Yeah, it did work.
It did work, and it worked hugely effectively. Although we can argue whether it did work technically in terms of the number of votes cast. I think I'm accurate in saying that Jeremy Corbyn actually got more votes cast than Keir Starmer. So you might argue that actually Keir Starmer wasn't popular.
Yeah,
it
but
certainly wasn't Blair. However, he got the vase from one side of the room to the other.
Let's not be churlish about it. 412 MPs is a superb majority. 2/3 of the seats for 1/3 of the vote. What's not to like? Lib Dems have been doing that for years.
Yeah, exactly. And then the Lib Dems as well. Let's mention them because we talked about whether or not Ed Davey was having a good campaign, whether the stunts had worked or not. We emphasised a lot the importance of targeting. And actually, they probably had around 80 seats to realistically target, and they won 72 of them.
That's not what happened, though. I know on good authority that they started with fewer target seats. They said they had more, but then they started taking some really seriously, including some near where we're sitting now. So for once, the Lib Dems actually got roughly the percentage of seats that reflects their vote, but
they punched above.
Yeah, and but they pile up their votes in individual places. They let other places they can't win go hang. And fair play, they got 72 seats. It's a record for the party.
And it certainly worked. I mean, I was campaign manager for one particular seat. We weren't a target seat. At the start of the campaign, we were being told, go and help in these other seats, the target seats. And we were saying, no, our canvas returns are looking good. And they kept saying, no, come on, you've got to go and help seats that can actually win. Midway through the campaign, we were being told to stay where we were. And towards the very end of the campaign, people were being told to come to us. So actually, in terms of a strategy of starting with a cautious number, gradually building it, spot on.
Or, as I would say, incredibly lucky, because Ed Davey messed up the campaign by playing Joey the Clown. He would have had so many more seats if he'd actually looked like leader of the opposition.
I don't think
100, 80 to 100, I'd have said.
I don't think it was physically possible under the electoral system to get many more than 80 seats. You've got to remember that the seats that they were only likely to win were where they were in a strong second place. So, yeah, this was a victory for targeting. It was also a victory for tactical voting. I would agree with you that in terms of the national campaign, then the Lib Dems' overall percentage didn't go up much during the national campaign.
Didn't it go down?
Compared to
% or something like that.
Compared to previous elections, it has. So can we take away from this that there is a resurrection of liberal democracy and the public are engaged with the party again? I don't think we can, but can we take it as a very clever strategy of some very popular MPs in the waiting in those individual constituencies? Yes,
well, yeah,
I believe that happens.
But hang on a sec. A lot of the MPs who got elected weren't really that well known, locally maybe a bit, but that was an anti-Tory vote. We haven't talked about the Tories yet. There are two reasons I think the Lib Dems did so well. They didn't win here, by the way, where we're sitting, for one reason. They changed the boundaries. If they hadn't changed the boundaries, this would be a Lib Dem seat too.
This particular little
this
fiefdom,
tiny little
one of the
fiefdom.
smallest. It only has one voter.
Yeah, if I'm not registered,
and you didn't vote for the Lib
well,
Dems.
we'll come to that.
Well, no. I think we need to address this.
Well,
I'm not
that's
going to let you off the hook on this. Just
what
so
do you mean let me off? That you'd be thanking me because the two reasons that the Lib Dems did well, no great thanks to Ed Davies' joke campaign, were the complete collapso of the Tory vote, with what it seemed to me an active effort to make themselves look foolish, and reform. Reform was the magic ingredient that must have delivered at least 50 seats for the Lib Dems.
It was the gift which kept giving, I must admit. But Lembit's justification for supporting reform is it was some incredibly complex Machiavellian ploy to make sure that reform did so well that it helped the Lib Dems in seats. Is that a fair analysis?
It's your analysis. The Lib Dems messed up their campaign, and it really incensed me that they went along with this nonsensical, oh, there's a climate emergency rubbish, and no differential as far as I could see with foreign policy, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Voting for the Lib Dems is like voting for the other two lamestream parties, Labour and Conservative. But notwithstanding that, there was a tactical reason to vote for reform, because reform did very, very well. And in places where the Tories were weakened a little bit, it was reform that pushed them over the edge. I'm not going to pretend that was the only reason. I actually was persuaded that reform was really kicking the whole of the country up the backside. And you might even remember that Nick Clegg, I think, was once going on saying to people, vote Labour. So I'm not new on this one, but fundamentally, if whether you agree with what I did or not, if reform hadn't existed, the Lib Dems would have had maybe 30 seats.
I mean, there's no doubt that reform was the big story of the election, and it's also the story of the election night, because when that exit poll came out, there was talk of 13 seats or so being won by reform. I think that just pinged. Is that Nigel Farage?
Yeah, it'll be Nigel. Look, Nigel, I'm busy.
Yeah, clear
yes,
Nigel.
Him again. Yes. Okay. Yeah. No, I've got the bigger Rubik's cube. I'll call you later.
But if that vote share had been under a proportional representation system, then just think how many seats reform would have. And one of the things that I find myself, ironically, in support of Nigel Farage is a call for the change of the electoral system.
But that's not going to happen.
They got a huge vote, and democracy suggests, whether you like it or not, they should have had more seats.
500, and yeah, I agree. 532 members of Parliament won't agree. The two lamestream parties, the Conservative Labour Uni Party, isn't going to go for it. Of course, Reform would like it. Though interesting, as I said before, the Lib Dems got their fair share this time, 72 for 72. If the Labour Party got the same proportion of seats for their vote as Reform, they'd have ended up with 12 seats. Yeah. Well, not 412.
But whether you like it or not, it is bizarre and it's not democratic. And I disagree with you slightly when you say that the other parties may not go for it. There could be circumstances in which a rump Conservative Party actually also finds itself in favour of proportional representation. Because it's not going to be the old two big parties anymore.
No.
Those boundaries are changing.
The Tories haven't fractured.
They not yet, but just watch this space.
Well, how?
Well, because in the next year, I think reform will be seen by many people as the right-wing opposition. The Conservatives will have to decide whether they want to cozy up to reform and become another right-wing opposition, or do they want to go down the moderate Conservative wing. I think that tension is so great that they could potentially split.
There's only one way, you're right, is if they get a leader who's so divisive in the Tory party that, say, 20 Conservatives decide to clear off to reform. But there's a danger to reform, and I wouldn't advise them to just say welcome, because just as Nick Clegg wrecked the Liberal Democrats through entryism by bringing his cabal in, no offence, so also, actually, you were proper before Nick Clegg came in, and then he poisoned your mind.
What is your issue with
He wrecked the party.
He didn't. He got it to he got it into government, for goodness sake.
Get into government.
He did get into government.
Oh no, he didn't.
He was deputy prime minister. That's pretty well into government.
That's because of what Paddy Ashdown did. That's because of what Charles Kennedy consolidated. And then he took this.
He was one of the most popular leaders of the party. Do you remember all of those television shows? I agree with
briefly. And only one person said that. That was Gordon Brown. Look, I can't impersonate him. I agree with Nick. Nick was part of the reason I lost. I was part of the reason I lost.
That's
and Nick was part of the reason.
That's why you're really bitter about Nick.
He had actually managed to keep his.
Can we deal with today?
Oh no! When I'm trying to defending myself, you have to change the subject. Nick, I'm on to you.
Have you finished talking about Nick Clegg? It's ridiculous. Come on.
It's easier to do a Rubik's Cube than to justify Nick Clegg.
Yeah.
Anyway, right. So the fact is, I would say that there's no real chance of electoral reform because even if the Tory split, maybe at most you get 30 Tory MPs. This is not realistic going to reform. Reform's got to be really careful because then the centre of gravity will change and they'll end up like a watered down version of what Farage has been, and he won't be in control. And he needs to be in control because the party is essentially in a war footing for 5 years. But let's say 30 join. That's still 40 on one side plus the Lib Dem, so 120, say if you include the minor parties, and 530 who are against it. End of story.
Turkeys don't vote for an early Christmas.
They don't vote for
I absolutely get that.
Christmas.
But let's look at one of the other remarkable results on election night, and that is the demise of the Scottish National Party. Unbelievable. I mean, they went from, what was it, 48 down to
9.
Down to 9.
Single figures.
It's unbelievable. And what do you put that down
That's only
to?
what because what I put it down to was the fact Nick Clegg wasn't in charge. Otherwise, it would have been 8. Because that's what happened to
Every time you mention Nick Clegg, I'm picking up this Rubik Cube. I'm serious.
All right, well, just let's sit here in silence then. You couldn't handle the truth about that Rubik's Cube, which is back in fashion, by the way, unlike us. Some would say.
Yeah.
The thing about SNP, it was absolute just desserts. The terrible performance of Nicola Sturgeon and the continuing legal case there, together with some idiotic decisions, wokeness gone mad, it just meant that they failed. And I have to say, I think the Green agenda's harmed them as well.
And the Greens got 3 seats in the end.
They got 4.
They got 4 seats.
You haven't really been paying attention. Do you know what we do on this podcast? Did it strike you? Maybe you might want to watch a little bit of politics.
Has to be the general election.
Well, this is hopeless.
You didn't even know there had been a general election called. I had to call you from an airport and tell you.
I was pretending. I was embarrassed.
Okay.
The one thing you did get right. You did get that right.
What about the big beasts? Was there a Patillo moment? Everyone talks about when Michael Patillo lost his seat in '97. I think it's
Liz Truss losing, former Prime Minister losing. It would be as embarrassing as a former or a current leader of the Liberal Democrats losing their seat during an election. Like, oh yes, Joe Swinson.
Ah, okay.
Okay, fact to SNP, I think it was. Yeah.
I think that Rees-Mogg for some people would also be the Patillo moment.
But he did it with such grace.
He did it with grace.
Really
and Liz Truss just turned up to account at the last minute. She just stood there, didn't say
under
a word,
duress,
left.
didn't want to be on the stage, quite obviously.
And I think graceful defeats are really important. I thought Rishi Sunak was very graceful when he came out of Downing Street. He paid a tribute to Keir Starmer. I liked that. I liked also that Keir Starmer paid tribute to Rishi Sunak. I think that decency in showing that democracy can move from one party to the other with that respect was important. I thought one of the speeches of the night was the Chancellor's speech. Obviously a speech that he'd prepared thinking he was going to lose his seat. Jeremy Hunt in Surrey. And then he went on to win it just against the Lib Dems and made a fantastic speech. Then there were some poorly pitched leadership bids from a few of the Tory MPs.
Such as Penny Mordaunt.
Well,
who lost her seat. I thought she was going to be the next leader.
Yeah.
She had it all lined up and boom,
off she went. Is one of the problems for them is that some of the people that would have been running for leader didn't win their seats. So some big beasts lost it, but of course a lot of new MPs have come in.
Do you know how many seats the Conservatives gained that night? I know. Have a guess.
1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know which one it was?
Was it in Leicester?
Yes. That's impressive.
Because
you did pay attention.
Because I spent all night in this TV studio listening to all of this coming in, and it was the seat which had several Labour candidates in it.
Yeah.
Keith Vaz's old seat.
Yes, and Keith stood as far as I remember.
He did. 3,000 votes he got.
And basically, all that happened there was the vote was split like a number of different ways for Labour, but they did gain that one seat. The one seat.
At the studio I was in, the Labour, the sort of Conservative representative got all slightly excited just for a few moments until it was pointed out to him the reasons why. Yeah. So let's talk about these new MPs that have come in. There will be a lot that, particularly on the Labour side, probably didn't expect to win, maybe 6 months out.
Oh, I think they did. I remember when I first stood up in Newcastle upon Tyne for the Lib Dems in '92, I began to think, maybe, just maybe I can win. And I built the party vote from 13.2% to 11.7%.
So you got 11% that first time.
Yeah. And I'd lost 1.5, basically. But I thought, I'd actually convinced myself, maybe I can win. So I think that the first time out, you do begin to believe your own nonsense, really. because people very rarely say, "I'm definitely not voting for you." They often say, "I'll think about it," which is a no.
Yeah,
But you don't know it's a no.
yeah. But they will still be shocked at the first week, the reality.
First months, actually.
Well, yeah,
it's such a complicated job.
It is a complicated job. It's a complicated process. And I think it's got a lot more complicated since you and I were there. My understanding is this time round, it was better organized. They have a buddy for every single new MP in place. Some of the staff around the House of Commons have all agreed to buddy.
Indoctrination from the outset, then.
A buddy, I would call it.
Yeah, you would do.
Rather like Freshers Week, there were different stalls where you could go around and talk about how you claim your expenses, how you claim for this, that, and the other. How you
that worked out well for us, didn't it? How you claim your expenses,
how you table a parliamentary question, how you speak in parliament. So I think they've had a lot more training, which is a good and welcome thing. But that said, it's a shock to the system.
But there's no substitute for experience. I didn't really know the job. I don't think you can know the job in under 5 years. The second term, you actually begin to understand it, and so you've got a whole lot of green, as I'm not the party, but in terms of the outlook, green politicians, wet behind the ears, probably being even more establishment indoctrinated, according to what you're saying, at least, and not really knowing what to do. 335 new MPs. Most of Parliament is new. I don't think that's very healthy.
I think it's incredibly healthy if they all remember why they're there, and if they all challenge the current system. I would love to reform Parliament. Its stuffiness, the fact you can't clap, the fact you have to call people honourable members, the fact that people call you sir and madam. If this new intake say this is nonsense and they don't become part of the system in the next 6 months, they could actually create a really modern, dynamic Parliament.
How?
By changing some of those archaic rules, it makes us look so distant and so stupid.
In the past,
people dressed up in wigs and all this nonsense.
In the past, 100% of the cabinet had gone to private schools. Do you know how many were this time? 4% on the cabinet. Do you know who that was?
Keir Starmer?
Yes. Yeah. How ironic. And they're bragging about the fact that they've got people, there are people on the cabinet bragging about the fact that they left school with no qualifications. I don't think that's good. I don't think that really represents the kind of cabinet I want. Imagine if you got onto an airplane and the pilot says, well, actually, I'm not qualified to fly the plane. We'd say, oh, it's really good that they're an equal opportunities employer. Of course you wouldn't. And actually, it's more serious. It's not quite a good analogy. It's more serious as 70 million people on the good ship UK with unqualified people on the bridge.
Well, look, in future podcasts, we will decide whether it's the Titanic or whether it's a lovely P&O cruise.
Ah, very good. P&O, we are looking for sponsorship, by the way.
Uber have said no, and there was somebody else that said no.
There's always
Rubik Cube, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, this has been the Very Liberal Podcast. And if you want to find out more, you look on this little bit at the bottom.
No, it's here, actually. You're not even getting that right now. It's just
Go on, Lembit, you do the little bit at the bottom.
I've done it now. I've done it now. Carry on.
That's it. You will normally end the show. I'm not used to ending the show.
I didn't realise you'd had enough.
I'm bored now. Can you just end the show?
All right. This is where you'll find the details. Do tell your friends if you think it's any good. Tell us if you don't. I'm Lembit.
And I'm Mark Oaten.
See you next time.